Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Go, go, go.
Folks, welcome back to another episode of The Fallen Badge. Today, the murder of Correctional Officer Merle Clutts and Correctional Officer Robert Hoffmann Sr. United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prisons, United States Government. Officer Clutts had 19 years on as an officer with the Federal Bureau of Prison. He was a Korean War veteran. He had a wife, 2 sons, and a daughter. My understanding from the resource material, he was going to be retiring in the spring of the following year. Now, Officer Hoffmann, he had 13 years at the Bureau of Prison. Now, he was married. I know he had a son, because that son worked with him there at Marion, but I don't know about any other children. Now, Marion Prison, it's about 9 miles south of the city of Marion, Illinois. Now, they built that prison and opened it in 1963, and it was the replacement for Alcatraz, which they closed that same year. Now, I believe it was a level 6 prison. It was absolutely a maximum security federal prison. Now, one thing that was of interest about this prison here, other prisons sent the worst of the worst there. Prisoners they couldn't deal with. A good many of these prisoners that went to Marion had committed a murder in another prison they were sent from. So these were bad people. Now, they kept what they considered the most dangerous inmates in H Unit. Now, H Unit was separate from the general population. Now, up until 1983, inmates were out. They could commingle. They ate dinner together, breakfast, all their meals. They had workshops, all the stuff you'd expect at a prison. That was all going to change October 22nd, 1983. Now, the suspects in these 2 events, because these 2 events occurred about 10 hours apart, give or take. These suspects were members of the same gang. And even though the FBI indicated that they don't think the 2 events were related, I just don't believe in coincidence. So it's 10:15 in the morning. Officer Clutts, him and 2 other officers, they're escorting one of the leaders of this particular gang. They're escorting him from his cell to the showers. Now, the footage I saw and the interviews that I listened to, everything seemed to indicate that the inmates had their handcuffs behind them, with an officer on each arm and then one officer walking behind him. Now, I don't know what happened this particular morning. Somehow or another, though, he got away from his escorts and he ran to the front of a cell. Now, there's an opening in the bars of the cell door so you can hand trays of food in or whatever. And he stuck his hands in there, and the inmate inside had a makeshift handcuff key, and he unlocked the restraints on this first suspect, this inmate. The appellate court in this case would later pose the question of why the escorting officers were at such a distance away from the inmate. They didn't understand that. One of the officers did hear the click of the handcuffs being released. This officer also said he saw the inmate inside the cell raise up his shirt. He had a shank there in his waistband. Inmate in question, he pulled that shank. Now, he went after Officer Clutts because he had a vendetta against the officer. Now, one of the interviews I saw, which is a part of the resource material, one of the officers that was there, he said he made a decision, and that was to save his own life, and he stepped back out of the way, and the inmate ran past him and went after Officer Clutts. Now, the resource material varies as to how many times the inmate stabbed Officer Clutts. I saw as few as 29 and as many as 40. I also listened to part of the interview of the inmate later, trying to justify why he murdered the officer. After he stabbed Officer Clutts to death, the inmate then dropped the shank and walked back to his cell. So now they transport Officer Clutts to the hospital. He's dead shortly after he arrives. Now about 10 hours later, about 8:30 at night, same day, same H unit section of the prison, another inmate, same gang. He's being escorted by Officer Hoffmann and two other officers. They're escorting him from the recreation cage back to his cell. Now somehow or another, and it played out almost verbatim to the way the first attack went, this inmate is able to get away from his escorts, get his hands through the opening in the bars of one of the cells. Inmate inside takes his handcuffs off for him and hands him a shank. Now in this case, this inmate attacked all the officers there. So he begins attacking the officers. Now he stabs one of the officers. Officer Hoffmann's able to drag that officer to safety. And Officer Hoffmann's also been stabbed. Officer Hoffmann then returns to the tier, and he's trying to save the second officer, who is still being attacked. So he rescues the second officer, and the inmate is stabbing him again. He finally collapses there on the floor, and his son, who is a correctional officer there, gets to his dad. Now Officer Hoffmann, he dies from his wounds. I didn't see any information on the number of stab wounds that Officer Hoffmann received, but it was enough. The two other officers lived. Officer Hoffmann did not. Now both of these inmates got tried for murder, given another life sentence. Well, a shocker, they already were in prison for life. Now, what happened after this would become the new procedure for supermax prisons, because that's what they would become known as, supermax, also known as control unit prison. Marion, and I'll give it to the administration of Bureau of Prisons, they came in and they didn't play. They went to a full lockdown, 23 hours locked up. No more eating together, no more interacting in any way. You get one inmate out, he's by himself. The director of the Bureau of Prisons at the time would comment later that as draconian as the permanent lockdown was, he believed it was the only way to deal with a small number of inmates in the population who showed absolutely no concern for human life. And he made the point that the two inmates who had killed the correctional officers were already serving multiple life sentences. So adding another one would have no effect. Now that's a shocker right there. What's even a greater shock is it continues to happen even today. 41 years later, we're still letting correctional officers get slaughtered in these prisons. And we just give these inmates another life sentence. Every prison in this country ought to be locked down. They all be controlled. Now, I'll point out the fact that they did not have another officer at Marion murdered after they went to lockdown. So despite the anguished complaints from attorneys and civil rights people who say this is cruel and it's awful and it's mean, well, these guys got to Marion for a reason. They were already mean or they wouldn't have been there. And the fact that correctional officer wasn't murdered, at least for over 20 years, means the method is sound because it saved lives. Get so caught up in the rights and the complaints of the criminal that we forget all about those that are trying to manage them. Now, this control unit model that they began at Marion, they used that same model when they opened up ADX Florence in 1994. And that was a specially designed supermax prison. So people may not have liked it, but it worked. And if the inmates are crying about it, that must mean that it's working. Correctional Officer Merle E. Clutts. Correctional Officer Robert L. Hoffmann, Sr. End of watch, October 22nd, 1983.